Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò. Welcome to you who made it here in the auditorium, and welcome to the people who are in the library for our overflow. So there are about 30, 40 people there. I hope you'll enjoy the evening. It's a very intense evening, and it's a great way for us to greet back to Casa Italiana two very dear friends, Idanna Pucci and Terence. But before I introduce them, I just want to ask you that before you leave, you can buy a copy of the book, and Terence and Idanna can sign it for you. But take a look at the exhibit that is on the walls of Casa Italiana right now. It's an exhibit dedicated to fashion and the Winter Olympics, winter fashion, but it talks a lot about also of the role of women during fascism and how that was somehow refashioned during that time. And we decided to close that exhibit with a panel that is actually the cover of the book, because there is a connection, because the first thing that Emilio Pucci ever designed was the uniform of the skiing team of his American university, Reed College, in the 30s, right, Idanna? In the early 30s. So we thought that there was an ideal connection between the fashion on the slopes of the Cortina Olympics that never happened, because these ones that we have in the exhibit are from 1944, and these episode that we recount tonight. And what Terence and Idanna did in this book was really combining the history with a capital H of the big political facts with the history of a person that later on in life would become one of the most famous and well-known and respected Italian creatives. So what's behind that person that is associated with those colors and that beauty and that sense of light, and what was his life like before, and how heavily impacted it was by historical facts that, of course, had a big relevance also on a larger scale. Idanna Pucci, the name gives it away. She's also the niece of Emilio Pucci. Her father, Pucci, was the brother of Emilio. She also worked for her uncle. And she has a career as a writer, history writer, and a documentary maker. We presented almost anything that Idanna did here at the Casa. We are big fans. And there is a fil rouge that is somehow, or in some way or the other, the people that she talks about in her books are related, are part of her family in the most extended sense. But she always picks people that had something to say from the point of view of values and battles. So she wrote a very impressive book on Pietro Savorgnan di Brazza, that was the explorer of the Congo. He's the only European that still has a city named after him in Africa, because the memory that he left was not the horrible one of other Europeans. And we did an exhibit with Idanna and Terence about Pietro Savorgnan di Brazza, related on your mother's side, right, Idanna? And her previous book, The Trials of Maria Barbella, recounts the story of this Italian-American immigrant woman who's the first woman to be sentenced to the electric chair in the United States, and the effort undertaken by an Italian countess, also related to Idanna, to appeal the sentence and to not give the death penalty to Maria Barbella. So it's a story about death penalty, it's a story about activism, it's a story about many other things, that we presented that too. Terence Ward is also a writer, but this is the first time that the two of them work as a team. And Terence wrote, his first book is basically a memoir of his family and himself going back to Iran 30 years after. I would say that he's one of the Americans with a deeper understanding of Iran around. So we will be very tempted to ask him other questions, but we'll try to stick to the topic for tonight. And then he wrote another beautiful book that we had the fortune of presenting here, The Guardian of Mercy. And it's a inside, in-depth look to the painting by Michelangelo Marisi da Caravaggio that is at the Monte della Pietà in Naples, The Works of Mercy. And he sees that through the eyes of the guardian, of the person that is placed there by the city to observe and to make sure that nothing happens to the painting. And this person, until the day before, worked in the sewage of Naples. So for him, this upgrade was also returning to the earth and returning to a sort of paradise. So it's through the eyes of this very humble man that became friend of Terence and Idanna that he tells the story of this painting, and he basically gives a beautiful portrait of Naples as a living, sparkling, exciting city. So this time is the first time that they team up together to write this book. I witnessed the gestazione, the long research that is behind it, very serious research, and not only in the family archives, they went all over the place to find the documents to back what they come up with in the book. And so we are here to listen to an extraordinary story. And to discuss with Terence and Idanna, we have the great fortune of having Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She's a professor of Italian Studies and History here at New York University, please. She's really one of the foremost scholars of fascism worldwide. She wrote about the culture of fascism. She wrote about fascist colonial cinema. And her last book, Strong Men, has become immediately a hit and is about to be published in Italy, right? Yes. Translated and published in Italy. Finally, it took some time. I wonder why. Exactly. And you might have seen Ruth because she has been. This is the cover of the book that they're not going to use at the end. So it's gonna have another cover, but that's the title. Strong Man.
È tutta una storia.
And the cover itself is a story, right, Ruth? Yes. And you might recognize her because she's a frequent contributor on MSNBC, CNN. Whenever somebody needs to know what is really fascism, that's where they go. Can you call this and that a fascist? That's where they go. And she never gives a populist answer. She never gives a pleasing answer. She gives an answer that is backed by the facts of history. So we have a great panel, the two authors and a fantastic respondent, and we are very excited to listen to them. Please.
Okay. Good evening. Well, you are very, very kind with us. And also you remember all these things that we have done and not having done, but anyway, that are part of our life. And you talk about ancestors. And yes, I happen to write about these ancestors, but the interesting thing, perhaps for me, is that when I write about them, I completely forget that my relationship, you know. And with Emilio, he's a recent ancestor, but it was particularly difficult because this story is very particular, and it had to be researched in a way that I didn't know that I could, that I was capable of doing it. Because even though I have the most wonderful partner, especially in research, I'm the one who usually does the most boring things. And then boring that then become fantastic, you know, at the end. So for me, this book was an initiation. I learned a lot about things that I thought I knew, and then I discovered I didn't know at all. And we initiated this partnership because 4 eyes and 4 hands in a story like that are almost essential. So you want to say something about this partnership?
Yes. Pete Hamill, who's a dear friend, and Fukiko Hamill is here with us. One day he told me, he said, Terry, listen, if your marriage is a bit rocky, I wouldn't recommend writing a book together. But actually, he also followed it up, whatever you do, if you do, just remember, none of us is Dostoevsky. Whatever is written can go. The point is to respect the reader, and for God's sakes, read it out loud between yourselves. And this book literally has been read out loud about 7 times, back and forth, because something very strange happens. Now, very few writers write with someone else, but a very strange thing happens when you hear it being read aloud. And all of us have a couple of writers that we say, every once in a while, we'll say, gosh, I just really love her voice or his voice. What has happened is something quite magical. Black and white figures on a page that you hear silently, all of a sudden have vocal acoustic quality. And the only way I can recommend to get that is to read it over and over again so that you eliminate all those speed bumps. A 4-syllable word, are you out of your mind, as Pete would say? Get it the hell out, you know. And so what you...
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Now you're going to hear how the dynamics of that...
No, not the dynamics. Is that what made it possible to write this book is when we discovered it was like a treasure hunt, because before it was just accumulating documents, correspondence in different archives. We knew that he had had a role, an important role during the war. But there was a lot of gossip in Italy that was very superficial and never gave an answer to anything. And so once we discovered this report from that he wrote for the OSS, for Alan Dulles in Bern, who was the head of the American Secret Service of Europe, based in Bern. Once we discovered this report, and that is it was a real treasure hunt, then it became clear that the writer wasn't going to be us, the narrator. It was going to be Emilio Pucci himself. And the report was called Report by Emilio Pucci in his role with the Ciano diaries, which were this document that Ruth is going to speak about a moment. And once we discovered that, and it was 60 pages long, we knew that we had the protagonist himself writing, and therefore the entire book is in his voice. We are just uniting one paragraph of his to the other, you know. So it's his book, actually.
And the other thing I wanted to share with you is this couldn't have been done by one author, because each of us have our own sensibilities and we fall down our particular rabbit holes that we enjoy falling down into. But actually, this story is also the history of Italy in its darkest, most terrifying disintegration conceivable, which is why no one really, or very few people, ever talk about it. It's a humiliating, a terrifying chapter of the country. And Emilio, in that moment of extraordinary danger, takes on a role that I think very few people would have, and yet no one truly knew any of the details about this until now. This report, as Idanna said, had been classified by the CIA and held top secret by them, by the agency, until he passed away. So even if he had wanted to see it, it was not accessible.
Actually, there is no copy.
Yeah.
He had no copy.
No, he never received a copy.
So it would have been simple if he had a copy.
And,
but he had no copy.
What Ruth is going to tease out is the importance of these diaries that he actually became involved in, and how they become the foundation of what's now called international law, and ultimately were used in Nuremberg.
So first I want to just, you have all my admiration for being able to weave so skillfully the life of, Emilio Pucci. And it's also about Edda Ciano and indirectly also about Galeazzo Ciano. But it's about Emilio Pucci. Putting his journey in context of, as you said, it's a very complicated time in Italy. A lot of the action, it's 1940 to 45, and especially 43 to 45. There's a lot to describe, and it's confusing, and you do such a wonderful job of also bringing out the character. And this is somebody. So I'm going to just set the stage so that you can appreciate what he did and what he was going through, and then also set the stage of what the diaries were and what they meant. So this is someone who grew up under fascism, and at the beginning, he had gone to, I didn't know this, he'd gone to the University of Georgia, he'd gone to the United States to study agriculture. So, and at that time, he believed, he had been socialized to believe Mussolini was strong, government was good, and he was enamored of corporatism. And then he comes back home, and he has a total change. And the important thing is that he became a pilot. And it's important to understand that aviation in fascist Italy, and we don't remember this today because they didn't come out of the war very well, shall we say. Italy was a powerhouse of aviation in the world, not just in Europe. In the late 30s, before they entered World War II, 25 nations trained their pilots in fascist Italy. So it wasn't just Italo Balbo, who set all the records earlier in the 30s and was a world hero. And then he became so famous, Italo Balbo, on the cover of Time. Mussolini demoted him because he got jealous. That happened. But it was the part of the armed forces that was the most prestigious. And it had this stellar reputation. So what happens to Emilio? He goes into the war, and from the beginning, because Italy had been at war since Ethiopia, Spain, Albania, and then there was overreaching, too many fronts, and Mussolini didn't really care to wait. He waited, to go into the war for a while, but then he goes in. And the armed forces were exhausted. The equipment was not ready for a world war, and it was a disaster. So he goes in there as a pilot, and he's in North Africa, and he sees the conditions that the pilots were using terrible old-fashioned equipment. They had no food. They're eating once a day. It's just on and on and on. It's part of what Mussolini is the first example of what I call autocratic backfire. When a leader stops listening to anybody but himself, this happens later in history too.
Let me guess.
And they get into a bubble where they have sycophants and family members. Ciano was his son-in-law who was foreign minister, and they don't listen to anybody. And they don't listen to their generals, and so repeatedly Mussolini made decisions about military affairs. He's micromanaging. He in fact, when the war broke out, he had become the minister of colonies, the minister of war, he had to do everything, because he's like a megalomaniac. And so things went very badly. So Emilio Pucci has this epiphany, and he becomes extremely disaffected. And so he's just very upset at what's going on. And he even, through Edda Ciano, who he knew obviously, he got an audience with Mussolini, and he said these things to Mussolini. And they recount this, and I had no idea. I learned so many things reading your book. And he gave a whole critique to Mussolini of the financial situation. The officers couldn't support their families. They were eating once a day, blah, blah, blah. So he was really trying. And so this gets to my first question, because what he does is Edda comes to him and wants to smuggle out the diaries written by her husband, who was foreign minister from 1937 to 43, and kept these diaries. And and they're a testament of his extreme skepticism about Mussolini's leadership at that point, his opposition to the German alliance. And so I'll just read you one from the day that Mussolini declares war on June 10th, 1940. I am sad, very sad. The adventure begins. God help Italy. And so the diaries are a document. Of course, he's compromised. He served Mussolini, right? But he had this. He had an interior revulsion against many things going on. So Pucci decides to help Edda smuggle the diaries out to Switzerland, and this is what he does. Yes, I will. So, and Ciano. Yeah. So Edda's doing this. In the meantime, Ciano, and I want to give context for this as well. So, when the Allies landed in Italy in 1943, obviously it's a huge crisis, and so Mussolini had his Grand Council, which he created many years ago, and they voted 19-7 to remove him from power, right? We think a lot about autocrats today and how do you get rid of them, right? They voted 19-7 to remove him. Ciano voted as one of those people to remove his father-in-law. Mussolini came to work the next day as though nothing had happened, because in his bubble of infallibility, he couldn't imagine that this had happened, and then he was arrested. But I just want to say, there are many autocrats appoint their sons-in-law to things, like Erdogan. Yeah, it's not just Kushner. I have a Substack called Lucid, and I have a whole, I have an article about sons-in-law, actually. It's Erdogan, Orban, they just all do it, because the son-in-law is safe, and you can also throw him under the bus. And so Ciano was sentenced, he was put in prison, and he was executed. Mussolini executed Ciano. And so this book is also about the drama of Edda, who has her husband executed and needs to get to Switzerland with the diaries. And all of this is happening, and Pucci is making it happen. So this is the drama of the book. So you see there's a lot going on, and they're extremely talented in the way they're able to tell it. So my question for you, I have several. My first question is, war is time, like war and when you have foreign occupation, these are times when people, ordinary people, I mean, he wasn't so ordinary, but individuals will do things that they never expected to do. And what do you think it was that led him to take these risks and do this? Because he wasn't a particularly political person, and the reason he became outraged is because he saw that his professional colleagues and in the military were being treated badly. So,
well, I'll just give you my take, because again, in a partnership, everybody has a different opinion. I think that actually, if you go back, it probably was his experience in America, because seeing those diaries, when you read them, and actually they're cited in the book, little excerpts, as you're going through the war. And when you read them, you understand the same revulsion that maybe some of you in this room had when you first saw the expletive deleted Watergate tapes, or some of you, these Epstein files. They're so squalid and they're so full of distrust. It's so clear that this was not an axis, this was not a partnership, that Mussolini, in his paranoia, did everything to rage against Hitler in private. But whenever the Germans walked in the room, he cowered in a very pathetic way. And Ciano's conflicted with this, so he just writes it down as yet another day in the office. but when you read it, just think of these figures and how, what extraordinarily enormous imaginations that they were able to capture in the common person, and to reveal them as pathetic, really squalid creatures, and to read it on paper is how you tear a mask off a god. Okay? So our friend Emilio had been to America. He understood this country's way of thinking. If these diaries could get into American hands, then the so-called enemy that now was trying to liberate his country would understand that actually the Italians themselves weren't keen on this war, that they actually didn't want this war, that this was actually the act of a gambler who was a megalomaniac. And so I think that Emilio, sensing how we think here, having read through some of these diaries, because of course he would have had them with Ada when she appeared and let him see, I think he thought, this, I have to do something for a higher good. I have to risk my life. And by risking my life, that meant to be tortured by the Gestapo, to be chased by Mussolini's henchmen, but also by the SS, to go through pains and suffering that would have broken all of us. So I believe that it's the fact that he actually spent some time here in America, understood how we think, and thought maybe these pages can redeem this country that's been so destroyed and so...
I have
so
a slightly different...
Well, as I told you...
No, it's not entirely different. This American background, coming to America for him was a turning point. First of all, he was coming from a very traditional background, very rigid, also in Italy, and he arrives in America, and for him it was a kind of liberation. You know, it was the rapport between people were much more easygoing, less formal, and he had never thought about politics arriving in America. So at the Georgetown University, well, he came on a scholarship at Georgia University. He came on a scholarship, and in agraria, but he didn't come there to study about cotton. He thought he would study about olive groves and wine, and very soon, the students bombarded him with questions about fascism, and he couldn't answer. And he was so upset about his lack of knowledge. And then, because of many adventures, he ended up in Reed, okay? And in Reed, he studied political science. And this Georgia experience had changed him. And so I think when the moment came of taking this very important decision, do I help this friend and the diaries? The question is, would he have helped her to cross the border if she hadn't had the diaries? And I don't think so, frankly. And you don't either. I don't think so.
And he paid a big price, because on the one hand, he had his patriotic reasons, because many Italians, it was a big shaming to have lost the war and to have the stain of fascism. They had the resistance. That's, of course, very important. It was the largest resistance in Western Europe. But it was a stain. So he wanted to have a different view of Italy prevail. So that was important. But he had helped Mussolini's daughter. He had arranged for her children to get to safety. And she was in Switzerland. They were all out of the country, while Italians were going through total hell. You know, and even after the war concluded and Mussolini was killed, people were starving. They were living in caves. There was rubble. It was terrible. And so there was a lot of resentment that he did that. His figure is a way to track this very complicated history. And so I had a question for you, Idanna, that at the end of the book, you talk about that doing this research was like also getting acquainted with, rethinking about your memories of your uncle. And I didn't find this surprising when you said that, he didn't speak about his younger years, and there was what you call pernicious blackout over many bygone events. And here we're dealing with, in Italian, la memoria scomoda del fascismo, the uncomfortable memory. And also trauma, because he also never spoke about how he got the scar on his forehead, and he was subjected to one of the particular kinds of Gestapo torture. They had like a head vice, and he had a fractured skull. So he was tortured in a very bad way. And that's also typical, that you don't want to speak about those things. So please, I'm curious what's it been like for you.
First of all, when you said before that, Ada was in Switzerland, and the children, but he wasn't.
No.
He wasn't. He had stayed behind for many reasons, and that's why he was captured by the Gestapo and tortured. They were looking for the documents and for the diaries, and he knew where they were, and he refused to talk under torture. But yes, there is this thing of this blackout. But I think it was in all families, and not only in my family. It was all walks of life, because the horror had been so big, and also the doubts, the information that wasn't exactly right, and who's one, the racial laws, and who agreed them or not, it was like a taboo. And also, I think that it's very difficult. I mean, we thank you for explaining, because to explain this story is so many layered. It's so difficult, and I think also, if you've had a very deep experience in life, and you meet somebody and says, "How are you? How was it?" You almost cannot explain, because the person, even if it's a beloved one, he will never understand completely what you. So it's better just silence. And that's how we grew up. I mean, I remember my grandmother. Now I know what she must have gone through, and the occupation, the German occupation of Florence, and all that. And yet she seemed so serene, so calm, and so calm that, and everybody seemed so calm that it wasn't even a question of, "How are you?" No questions, could be asked, because there was no reason to ask them. But I noticed the scar on my uncle's forehead, and I asked my father. I was 9 years old, and I asked my father, and my father said, he was faced with a terrible man. I remember he was, nasty man.
Yeah. So I know there are people here who are historians of fashion, and we're speaking of someone who's one of the most important figures in the fashion world. So I was curious reading the book. I almost wanted to know more about what led him, what his background was, because you said he's going to study agriculture. And then on his way back from, I thought this was interesting, on his way back from America in the late 30s, he stopped in Japan. And he was influenced by the aesthetics there. And I could see that, thinking about Pucci scarves and just lots of things about his designs. But, and he was also very inventive. Yeah. he was discovered. He was like making things for friends, and then he sewed. Edda was able to take the diaries because he sewed like pockets and things into her clothing, so nobody.
He sewed.
You explain.
One, leg
Of a pant.
of
Yeah.
his
Of
pants,
trousers.
and he put all the diaries in them.
Inside.
You know, all these notebooks. You know, they were not big. They were the Red Cross notebooks. You know, and he put them all in, and then he sewed this, and then put it around her waist. So much so they thought she was pregnant.
It's so smart. So yeah, I would like to know more about. Did he have an interest? Like, was it something that were people surprised that he ended up very quickly after the war, within relatively few years, having shows and becoming a major fashion designer?
No. First of all, he was a man who when an opportunity, he could see an opportunity, at the horizon. And he was such a positive. He had positivity. He was born with the gift of positivity, which is a blessing in life, because nothing can destroy you. And of course, he had a lot of fantasy and imagination. He was a mixture of bloods. In my childhood, I would always hear, "Oh yes, Russian blood, Russian blood." Now I know that I don't want any Russian blood, But at the time, it was a different story. All these so-called white Russians coming out of Russia and all. Anyway, and we did have a Russian side of the family. So he had this fantasy, curiosity, and imagination, which he was born with. He never knew he could draw, and he never knew that he was really interested in fashion. He was just, he knew what was beauty. I mean, if you grow up in Florence, especially at the time where there was no tourism, you are surrounded by great artistic expressions. And so after the war, all these young men had to rethink about their life. They saw Italy devastated. I know this from my father. And they said, "What am I going to do now?"
By the way, this is the entrance to the Ponte Vecchio in 1944.
What am I going to do? And when he had problems and depressions, he would head down to Naples, where his grandmother was, and his mother's family. So that's a very good blood, the Neapolitan blood, And then, of course, his grandparents had this house on the bay. And from the bay, he could see the islands on a clear day, and he could see Capri. And so it was an automatic thing to go to Capri. It was very easy. And that's when opportunities came in this little island after the war. Imagine, it was not New York where you had opportunities. It was this little island. And he was a man who always could place himself where luck could strike, which is the secret, you see. And this is also what he told me. And so he fell into fashion in the same way that he fell into Reed College. He didn't have any money to pay for the college, and because he was a real good skier, he realized that Reed didn't have a ski team. So he just presented himself after having hitchhiked all across America and all that. So I can imagine the way he looked. he presented himself at the dean's office, just like that, you know.
The dean, in his note about Emilio, said he noticed this young man coming in with a rather nice suit, but covered in hay and sort of clumps of grass on it, because he'd been sleeping in haystacks all the way across, riding the railways across the country, because before he went back to Italy, he wanted to see this country.
Yes, and so he just presented, hello. He could speak good English, because that is in the good families you learned French and English as children. And he said, "What? How can I help you?" the dean said. And he said, "I notice you don't have a ski team. So I would like to attend the college. I don't have the money, but I can form your ski team in exchange for tuition." And so the dean said, "Oh, but that's a good idea," because there was this mountain full of snow, Mount Hood, you know, and it was there. And so the day after, he said, "Well, but I have to see how you ski first." And so the day after, he presented himself, the dean, at the ski slope, at the ski thing, with his 5-year-old little girl. And Emilio said, "Can I borrow your child?" And he went up on the, I think there was
He went up
the thing
chairlift.
And then he put the child on his shoulders and skied all the way down with the child on his shoulders. And
he sprayed. He arrived at the end and just let loose a spray of snow as he came to a stop. The little girl was hysterically laughing, and the rector Keyser almost had an apoplectic fit. He almost had a heart attack. And that was the day he said, "I
Yes.
can't give you any money, but I can give you tuition." And so that's how he joined the ski team.
This is the way, and of course he didn't call it design. He said, well, the ski team cannot go around skiing looking like, I don't know,
in dungarees and
dungarees.
sweatshirts.
So he made the uniforms and had them made locally in Portland, and he put reed in red here, but they were tute. I don't know how you say in English.
One piece suits. All
One
in
piece
one.
overalls. All in one. They had never seen it before. You see, white. So
It's very fashionable today,
yes.
right? Jumpsuits.
Jumpsuit.
So to answer your question, he fell into it. One thing led to the other, and he
I think
knew
just
he could sketch.
Before are we going to look at some of the? I just want, when we think about his life and being in World War II in these difficult conditions, and then being tortured, it adds a dimension, like a poignancy to his designs, which were so happy and like full of leggerezza, lightness, and fantasy, and whatever other aesthetic influences he had on him. Just knowing that that he seems to have been a survivor for his personality, what you've described, but also almost a way you appreciate it more.
Yeah.
His aesthetics and the joy of his designs and the movement of his designs when you think about his past.
Yeah.
So thank you also for writing the book from that point of view as well.
Yeah.
But one thing that he said is, Europe, yes, during all fascism, the colors were black, blue, gray, white. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
But no other country in the world changed colors during bad times.
Yeah.
You go to India during all the British Empire, but the colors remained. And it was Indonesia, the colors remained. Africa, the colors. So he traveled a lot in all those countries, and he absorbed this this talent, really. He discovered a talent that he didn't know he had.
Yeah.
You see.
And part of the theme of the book is, especially when we're in the darkest of times, which some may suggest we may be experiencing in this country now, that there always is that light, and we must be resilient. And that resilience is what carries us forward, and that will carry us through this nightmare. But also very important is, even in the worst conceivable nightmare, which is, I mean, he literally went into inferno. I mean, this is a journey into hell. This metaphor of the Fenice, the phoenix rising from the ashes, it's not simply Emilio that's part of that, but also the cinematic explosion that comes out of Italy. Rossellini, De Sica. It's the stars that appear from slums of Naples. Sophia Loren, Gina Lollobrigida, Claudia Cardinale. All of the spirit, the writers, Calvino starts to be published for the first time. The art that starts to explode, and the music from Naples that just lifts everybody's heart. All of this is happening at the same time, which begs the question, what happens when the strong man falls? Creative spirits can then be heard. Creative voices can then have the courage to speak. Those who were self-censoring themselves, or others who were censoring those who could share a different light, all of a sudden the air is open. And we've been through experiences like that. We're going through it now. And I think that's a takeaway, this phoenix rising out of the ashes. And he becomes almost a parallel metaphor for what the country is doing. And there was this article by Laird Pearson of the Borelli Pearson of Vogue. And she said, for most Americans, Italy begins with the Roman Empire, ends with Dolce Vita, and there's nothing in between. But it's that Dolce Vita moment after the war, this innocence, the colors that Idanna was describing, that get introduced not simply to Italy, but come splashing across that ocean into America and then spread across this country. This is all part of a redemption story, and it's that's why we wanted to end it with that spirit.
Yeah, it couldn't be further. It's like a rebuke. His fashions and the colors are a total rebuke to the black shirt, right? The uniform and the black shirt. It's interesting to think. So should we see some, and then we'll take some questions?
Yes, we are going to take some questions after. So if you're in the library in the second floor and you have questions, please come downstairs and line up, and you can ask questions. Yeah. Thank you. You're going to see some images right now.
Well, actually, this is the image from Harper's Bazaar in 1948. It was taken in 47. That made his career. That image up in the right-hand corner. And here he is in Capri, sketching. And now we'll go through the early 50s, and then you'll see the explosions of color. The boutique in Capri, very simple. And Julian, I think you can make these a little bit bigger. Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh, yes, of course. Better move the chair. Okay. So, Idanna, you want to say anything about this? No?
This is a sketch that he did. You see, he knew that he could sketch suddenly. He knew that he could paint. These are the first, things that he did.
He also was designing hats, these carefree hats that
Yes.
you see on both of the ladies. And the one on the right is actually standing in front of the boutique, his boutique. And very humble beginnings, but he used to say, this is instead at the Palazzo Pucci, where where he had his atelier. But
Yeah, he's preparing, during the fashion collections twice a year. This very gloomy palazzo would become so lively, so unbelievably.
there's a small little quote that we were able to find from that period where he said, "I washed dishes and I served plates at dinner when I hitchhiked across the country and when I was at Reed. And when I see my counterparts, noble counterparts, come in and they see me at Canzone del Mare, in Capri, in my boutique, and they look at me with their nose in the air, almost embarrassed to see me, I get on my knees and I start scrubbing the floor just to embarrass them even more."
Yes, because one of the amusing things, when he started, in the family there was an uncle, the famous uncle, who sent him, got the scholarship to send him to study agraria in Georgia.
Growing, yes.
He didn't have any children, and this was his heir. He said, "Never in our family there's been a tailor, never. So you are not allowed to use the Pucci name." So that's why he started just Emilio, and he was the first one to write Emilio on the fabric, you see.
Yes.
But he didn't write it because it was a brand or anything.
No.
He never. Yes. From me.
And it was originally Emilio of Capri.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Giorgini, the great genius impresario, after the war, looks around. He knew the American mind too. And he had started the first GI shopping mall, in a way, in Florence for the GIs to buy artisan, gloves and leather products. Gucci gets his start there. But Giorgini also said, "My God, we have the most gorgeous architecture, stage sets. Let's use Palazzo Pitti, where there's La Sala Bianca." And in 1951, this is the first opening of the Sala Bianca, and all the fashion editors arrive in Florence and see this beauty, and they're bedazzled and stunned.
Yeah, he said Florence has the capacity to attract journalists and people from all over the world who would love to spend 3-4 days here. So before, the fashions were all in Paris, and suddenly this Giorgini, he was called, he said, "Let's organize that Florence gets part of the fashions, you see.
Let's seduce them.
Yes, let's seduce
and
them
Made
with
in
the
Italy
city.
is born with this event here. And then you also have hysteria in Rome, because everybody for 30 years, no American or Brit or anyone from the Anglosphere was traveling to Italy, because it was dour, black, saluting, marching, militaristic.
Yeah, so
And so all of a sudden you have Hollywood on the Tiber with you know who. Audrey wins her first Oscar. Everybody falls in love with this new discovery, this new country. Aspetta un attimo. Okay. And there we are. Scusi. Oh,
no,
sorry.
that is, go back, because this is, this is the first time this picture is shown. It's in this book, because at the last minute, just before going into print, we had chosen 8 pictures, and we thought that we had the rights and everything, and then the news came that we couldn't use them. And so desperately we tried to replace these pictures. And I saw a film, a tiny film, of a 3-minute film on Capri. it's called A Day in Capri. And it was the kind of film that in Italy it was shown before at the movies, before the real film. It was, and suddenly I see this, and it said Emilio Pucci's hat. And it took me 4 months to get to Cinecittà archives, I finally had to call somebody in the government because
A minister.
The phone would never answer. They would give me the wrong address. I went to Rome. It was closed. Just a thing. But I was determined to get this picture because for me, it is pure joy, pure the joy of the time. And then I got it.
Yes. And this is his Sicilian collection.
Terry, go on because you can see the Arlecchino, and this was always the doubt: is she Grace Kelly? Is she not? We never. Yes, that's him, and this is. Terry says, don't show that picture because it's so boring, It is boring, perhaps, but it's Georgia O'Keeffe's favorite dress. And it's in the museum in Santa Fe. And he designed it for her in 1954. So these are these mosaics in Sicily.
3rd century mosaics, and he then just decided it was time to introduce bikinis again.
See, this is an interesting picture because it was made by Stanley Marcus of Neiman Marcus. And it shows that Emilio had a film camera. He went around the world with this film camera. And so he could bring back all his inspirations. This is the Palio of Siena. It's the famous horse race in Siena actually twice a year, 3 times a year. And we show it because it has a pageantry and an incredible parade and procession. And so this inspired, it just shows how he got inspiration. And this inspired the Palio collection.
Yeah. And from these images, these are 300 to 400-year-old designs on their flags of the various contrade. Look at the strong geometry. Look at the waves. Look at the patterns. And this really changes his aesthetic, where he moves into those geometrical, those strong prints that you...
Well, it actually had happened before in Indonesia.
Yes.
This was a bit later, but it was the same thing, But this was there was a big exhibition in the Palazzo Pitti of the Palio collection. Mm-hmm. And it's just fun, you see. There he is, filling up the colors.
Oops. Scusa. Cosa è successo?
See?
So now he's gone to Indonesia. It's 62. He's made a round-the-world tour with his wife, and he's discovered batiks, which are always based on the rectangle that you see on the right, and then a vertical piece here. And you'll see 4 pieces that have the Indonesian batik design, the Javanese batik design that he uses. Right? Sorry.
He starts dividing the spaces, You see, this is very typical. This is almost he copied from a Javanese batik.
But what's interesting is while he's doing this, he's not naming these Bali High, but he's actually giving them names of that country. So Merapi, one of the great volcanoes, the mystic volcano outside of Yogyakarta, becomes a name of one of those princes. Semarang, the Chinese port on northern Java, is given a name to one of those princes. So he's not culturally appropriating, he's actually bringing that to your world. He's opening eyes. Yeah.
Bali, he was about 2 months in Bali, and what had amazed me, because I ended up there for many years, and what was amazing was one of the time when I came back to Florence, I said, can you show me your designs? Can you show me all the designs that are 1962 collection? It was really what made him, put him on the map. And so he says, yes, come down tomorrow. And I go inside this big hall in the palace where he had the fashion shows, and all the floor was full of his scarves from the Bali collection. And I understood, for instance, here you can see, because I'd been in Bali so many years, I recognized all the iconography. There is a gong of the gamelan, and then the position of these dancers are just so right. He really caught the whole culture. And then I said, "What? You don't have any photographs?" And he said, "Well, do the photographs." I mean, the result was out of focus, and with this horrible camera that I had. And so I asked him to borrow all the scarves, bring them to New York, and he said yes. And then I've had professional photography by Tim Street Porter, who was a friend of mine, and he was a quite famous photographer. And then he said, "But be sure you give them back to the boutique," which I did. So this is a wraparound, like a sarong, you know. And anyway.
And then he went to India.
Non lo so dove è stata
And this would have been taken
in India, yeah.
by Agra, by the site where you see where you find the Taj Mahal. But all of those colors are now in full bloom. And then this was taken in Udaipur at the Lake Palace. And
This is in Peru, Machu Picchu,
a
Cuzco.
whole series of Incan inspired works.
You see. Very feminine. There she is. This is very 60s. Anyway. Yes.
Then the roof of the palazzo he used as a stage set because it's very close to the cupola Brunelleschi, and he would send the young models out onto the terracotta tiles.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that I witnessed. There is a part of the book at the end. There are memories, fleeting memories of my uncle, and there. When I was about 9-10 years old, and I kept a journal. I don't know why I kept a journal. I didn't have many things to say, but I had this to say, that I witnessed all, the photographers arriving twice a year with all these models. Then there was always an overflow of models, and we would have models staying in our part of the house, and I was about 9 years old, and I remember Verushka lying on the ground on a corridor and doing her exercises, you know. And I was 9 years old with curly hair, feeling not very attractive, and I was watching these amazing beauties, you know, and I said, my God, I will never be like that. and I could have grown up with a lot of complexes, but I didn't, because I felt these. I was in front of a spectacle, a continuous theater spectacle. It was a theater, so it didn't really belong to me, you know, and that was a blessing, because I could have had trouble later on. Si. Let's hear some questions.
In the meantime, if you have any question, please raise your hand, and you can continue also to watch the. And somebody's going to bring you a microphone. Sì, 10 minuti.
Okay.
Prego.
I think he did some well-known work, commercial work for like Braniff Airlines, didn't he?
Yes. Yes. I was
living in Florence in 1968, and I saw that Emilio Pucci was going to be giving a campaign talk in a cinema. He's running for something, and my Italian friends made fun of me because they were all very left-wing, and they said he was conservative, and I was almost the only person there. But could you talk about, did he have a political career? Did he win an election?
Yes, he became a deputy of parliament, and he was in the Liberal Party, which was not right wing, but it was in the middle between right and left, he immediately gave up the health. No, he kept his health insurance. He wouldn't accept the health insurance from the government. He said, "I can afford it," you know, and he didn't accept the allowance given as a deputy of parliament. So he was socially minded, you know, and
He's one of the first politicians to speak about the environment.
Yes.
And protecting the environment. And also he's one of the few that actually spoke about the city as an urban organization that needed artisans, and that if we didn't protect the artisans, we lose our heritage. And whenever he was asked, "Oh, you're a stilista, designer," he would always stop the reporters and say, "No, io sono un artigiano fiorentino. I'm a Florentine artisan." And in doing that, he was echoing back to the rich artisan craft that Florence was famous for, but more importantly, he was not putting his nose in the air, which in Florence never ever gets you anywhere. He was being humble, and so it's strangely enough he has a lot of visionary quotes. There's some in the book towards the end. You'll see his political vision. He used to read Marshall McLuhan. He quoted Marshall McLuhan frequently. He spoke about the global village. All that you saw before was nothing more than the global village being compressed in design. And so he was a visionary beyond his time, who was capturing this new excitement that was about.
And Terence, we see here an image from the flood in Florence, 1967.
Yeah.
He was also instrumental in the resurrection of the city after that, like rallying for the rebirth and to collect money in the States for the
he came to America, and he traveled all over America.
Right. To collect money to save and to rescue the artisans.
The artisans themselves. And so he barnstormed across the country, and that's also, we essentially end the book in 1966, before corporate, before brand, before all of that corporatism begins to devour fashion and take out that wonderful spirit. We ended here in 66 with the flood of Florence. Again, the city attacked, just like in 1944, on its knees. And he barnstorms America, raises money. Jackie Kennedy puts her arms together, Teddy Kennedy comes to Florence. There's this whole outpouring, and all these children arrive from around the world, who then become known as the Angeli del Fango, the angels of the mud. And they start taking out of basements parchments and washing them and hanging them on clotheslines. It's a very emotional moment for Florentines. He goes out of his way to raise funds for all of that, and perhaps that was one of his greatest moments.
Other questions?
Could you elaborate on what these diaries actually, what would the impact of these diaries? I'm not familiar with them, to be honest,
Okay.
and so it seems to be so central to your story.
They
but-
were used in Nuremberg to convict the Nazi war criminals. Everybody, just like they're going to say after Iran, everybody will say, I was taking orders. That was Ribbentrop's position. Remember, Hitler had killed himself. All right? So all of them could blame it on the big man. We followed it. What these diaries establish very clearly is 6 months before, Chano's in the garden saying to Ribbentrop, and he writes this down in the diaries, it's one of the passages that is read in the Nuremberg trials when the British and the American lawyers are pressing Ribbentrop on the truth. And they say, did you not say in May to Chano, may I read it? When Chano says, I asked Ribbentrop, is it the Danzig corridor you want to go to Danzig so that Germany will have that group of German citizens part of the Third Reich? Or do you want, or do you want something else? And Ribbentrop turns to him and screams in this vicious, hysterical scream, you know, we want war. He repeats it 3 times. And therein is the entire evidence that this wasn't an argument between Germany and Poland. It wasn't some scrap that came out of nowhere, or that it was planned. This becomes the architecture for international law, and that becomes the first crime of all. The worst crime of all is planning a war before the altercation takes place. That becomes the architecture of international law that we have just seen broken in front of our eyes 10 days ago. There was no negotiations possible. The Germans did the same thing, and then there was the attack. So that is why these diaries were so important. Everybody in America read them. Everybody in Italy read them front to cover. And in that moment, everything fell away. The mystery of Hitler, the mystery of Mussolini, and Ribbentrop and the rest. They all become convicted based on these.
No, that's very important. There's also a passage. So Mussolini, allied with, kept drawing closer to Hitler, and then Hitler was pressuring him to go into the war when he did Poland, and they weren't ready. So they had this weird non-belligerence period that lasted till June 40. And Chano's the one who got sent to Germany to officially, tell them. And there's a passage in the diary where they're having dinner and the Germans don't speak to him at all. It's totally silent because they're very angry. And then Hitler would call Mussolini and scream at him. So the power dynamics of the Axis come through very clearly in the diaries. And Chano's like this inside presence. And so that's why they were so important.
And also the diaries basically prove that Chano was trying to negotiate a separate truce with the Allies. That was what he was trying as a sort of parallel diplomacy. There was the diplomacy of the Italian government that was 100% with the Germans, but at the same time, Chano, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was trying to negotiate with the high commands of the Allied forces in Europe for a separate truce, separate from Germany. It didn't happen, but that's what was he negotiating for, right?
And there were 2 or 3 members, Italo Balbo and others, of the so-called Grand Fascist Council that did not want war with Germany. They wanted to join the Allied side.
Yeah, they
and
wanted
so
to,
you had this
yeah.
tension that was really palpable. And
The other lesson for today, so I wrote a New York Times op-ed that came out February 1st, and it was, I think it was history, I've forgotten the name, but Trump's worst impulses could come back on him, and it was about autocratic backfire. And I gave 3 examples: Mussolini in World War II, Putin in the early Ukraine, and Trump right now. And this was February 1st, and I said that when they stop listening to people and they get megalomaniac, and then they're likely to go to war, or they go deeper into a war that is already not going well, but they won't listen. So in fact, when things weren't going well, that's when Mussolini volunteers to send troops, Italians, to Russia. Why not? Add another, front. So it's a lesson for today on a certain phase of leadership when you stop listening to anyone. You think you have all the answers. When you say, for example, what can stop me? Only my own mind can stop me. I alone can fix it. Or Mussolini's slogan was "Il duce ha sempre ragione." He's always right. Trump says Trump is always right, like literally. Or drain the swamp. He's recycling these things, but he's in a mood. So when you have leaders who get into that mix of thinking they're infallible, micromanaging, having gotten rid of anybody who has expertise, or just not listening to them. Because Mussolini had good generals there in terms of experience, but he wasn't listening. So it's the most dangerous time. And the diaries document these kind of erratic, mercurial leadership and not wanting to listen. That's another thing that they document. And so if you read them today, you see, recurrences from much later.
And little passages are included in books so you understand how deranged all this was.
One quick last thing is we didn't really end the book with the flood. We ended it in 1971 when Emilio was asked to design the emblem of the Apollo 15 mission to the moon. And
Landed there.
yes. And of course he immediately did it. And then he was asked if there was an object that he wanted to take to the moon and back. And he said, no, I can't think of anything. But he said, wait a minute, I have an idea. And he designed, he went to a goldsmith in Florence, and at the time there was one goldsmith or silversmith every neighborhood, and he designed 11 medals with this motif, everything the same but in gold. And 11, why? Because one was for the Pope, one was for the President of the United States, one of the President of Italy, 4 was for his family, 1 for his wife, and 2 children, and himself. And 3 were for the astronauts, Scott, Warden, and Irwin. And 1 was for the moon, to be left there on the moon. And I carry here the one that was his, and it brings me good luck, So this has gone to the moon and back. Yes.
Thank you so much to Idanna and Terence for the book they wrote, for the courage they had, for the patience, the stubbornness with which they investigated a very complicated history. Thank you to Ruth Ben-Ghiat, as always, for bringing clarity and synthesis to everything she touches and making it understandable and clear. And thanks to all of you for being here. Don't forget, if you want to buy a book, Idanna and Terence are going to sign it for you, and take a look at the exhibit upstairs. If you're interested in fashion and fascism, we are going to have a presentation on March 30th with Eugenia Paolucelli talking exactly about that. Fascism and fashion. She was here until 10 minutes ago. So come back for that. Thank you very much.